So thanks everyone for coming. This is, I guess, our first WNCG seminar of the semester, and it's my pleasure to have Sewoong Oh from Illinois. Sewong has done a whole bunch of work in both networking and networks, and also machine learning. And I guess today he'll be talking about what looks like a completely new area, like security and privacy. So,
thank you, Sevcik. So this is, well, when you look at it, it's not so new. It's very much machine learning with some networking component and also some privacy aspects to it. So this work is motivated by recent advances in popularity of what's called anonymous messaging applications, such as Yik or Whisper or Secret, those of you who know what it is, and I'll explain what it is, and the mathematical and engineering challenges that goes with it. And this is joint work with Julia Fanti and Kanan Ramchandran at Berkeley, and Pramod Visunath and Peter Kairus at Illinois. So anonymous social media allows people to share sensitive information or opinions without being the fear of being judged or imprisoned. So on one hand, you have something like WikiLeaks, which allows you to share sensitive and important documents. But in this talk, we focus on the other side, which is known as anonymous social messaging, which allows ordinary people like us to share sensitive information about ourselves willingly and anonymously. And the data here is the content of the message, and that's not what we're trying to protect. So it's to be made public and to be shared. But on the other hand, the metadata, which is the author of the person who initially posted the message, is the one we're trying to protect. And you can see why it's important, given the sensitivity of the issues. And you might be wondering, so why would anyone use this? So surprisingly, these messaging apps are widely popular. And one of the reasons that people give is that, well, the Facebook is, in some sense, people are too happy on Facebook. They try to show the best version of themselves. So in order to have real, true conversation or true feelings or share true opinions, it requires such anonymity or anonymous platforms to do that. And that's perhaps one of the reasons Facebook itself is trying this out with Rooms, which is an anonymous platform developed by Facebook. So two of the most popular anonymous social messaging apps is known as Yik and Whisper, and this is how it works. So if you're using this, and if you post something on these apps, then it's gonna be sent to the people that's within some radius, usually 10 miles, from you. And so on and so forth. Okay. And these are surprisingly popular, and one of the evidences that it's popular is that these apps are currently, by law, banned from any of the high schools. So if you try to use it within some high school, then the app automatically shuts down. So this means, I think, two things. One thing is that it's so popular that you need a law to ban it from students from actually using it. And the other is that there's so much social cyberbullying going on in these apps that might be possibly a research topic for other researchers in psychology or maybe semantic analysis. And another weakness of these messaging apps is that there's no real business model that goes with it, because by construction, you're supposed to not learn anything about the users, so advertisement doesn't really work. So although they've raised hundreds of millions of dollars from venture capitalists, it's still, we'll see in time whether they make it into a profit or not. But nevertheless, we're interested in the mathematics and engineering part of it. And the thread on the identity of the message authors is real. For example, there was one instance where the Whisper was sharing the geolocations, the GPS locations of the messages with the Department of Defense. And they used it, I think, to figure out, for example, how many or what messages were coming out of Pentagon. And using these geolocations, you can easily figure out, using other information such as people's addresses and other things, who this identity of these people are. So the threat is real. And in this talk, we're interested in a different version
I'm sorry,
of, sorry.
I have a stupid question, but why do you need an app? Can you just make a fake email, fake Twitter account, and do your anonymous stuff from your anonymous Twitter account?
Well, you want to do it anonymously among everyone, right? It's not just you.
Yeah, I will make a fake Twitter account, and that's anonymous, right?
I see. So your question is, why don't I make an account and then...
Be subpoenaed by the Department of Defense and has to reveal your IP address.
But so can they, right? Okay, so this is a networking problem, or is it, so you see what he said?
Sure, sure.
Okay, is that, so yeah, cannot be subpoenaed by the Department of Defense?
They are subpoenaed, they are centralized, that's one of their main problems. So we are proposing them move to distributed and on a network.
By me creating a fake Twitter account.
If everyone is using a fake Twitter account and everyone is assuming...
Twitter account. I have the normal Twitter account, right? I can create my fake Twitter account and you can follow me with your normal Twitter account, right?
Sure.
You don't have to know who I am. I can be, electrical engineering student, right?
Sure.
Texas electrical engineering student posts like, I went to your talk, right?
Uh-huh.
So you can follow anonymous electrical engineering student without knowing who the student is, and you can keep your identity if you want. And then you can make anonymous UIUC professor account and be anonymous if you want, and have your, right?
So the popularity of these apps rises from the fact that it's shared among your peers. However, it's defined in this original version, it's defined by geolocations, one thing. And then also you can approve or disapprove these messages also anonymously. So I can like your message and no one will know who liked it.
As the anonymous UIUC professor.
So it'll be true if everyone on there was a Facebook where everyone was anonymous and you can like it. And then
Facebook where everyone assumes people can create fake profiles on Facebook, right?
Well, the assumption is that I also assume you're anonymous and assuming you know that I'm anonymous and this is common knowledge, and that's kind of that's shared among everyone. So I don't know if there are like 1,000 people who use their real name and there are 100 people who are using anonymous and then trying to send something. I don't know if that is the same, but that's not the main topic of this talk. Where the main topic is
so it's about hiding the IP. Is that what this is about, or
hiding the identity, if you will, and that will be made clear as we go along. Right. Okay. So in this talk, we're interested in a particular anonymous messaging app, which is called the Secret. And the way it works is that it tries to bridge social filtering with anonymous messaging by the following. So it uses your maybe contact network or Facebook to build a social network of people who are using this anonymous messaging app. And on top of this social network, if you post something anonymously, then it's going to be sent to your friends anonymously, so they'll get the message not knowing who sent it, and then if they like it, then it's sent to their friends, and so on and so forth. So in order to avoid spam and deliver the messages that are possibly relevant to you. So that's the setting that we're gonna look at.
So there's a notion of anonymous friends.
Right, the friends you have are from your social contacts, but you don't know who it came from among your friends when you get a message. You know there's a group of friends, you possibly know who they are, but when you get a message, you don't know who said it among those.
So what do the edges then correspond to?
Edges correspond to your, for example, Facebook friendships right now.
Okay, so if I know how the message is routed, I know who it came from.
If you...
Oh, I see what he's saying. He's saying,
I can message you.
I can message you on Facebook.
Right. So
see, the message is from someone, but you don't know who.
No, it doesn't say from. Yeah, it doesn't say anything about the author or whether it's routed or it's the first hop. It doesn't say anything about the route, but it just says it just gives you the message, and you know it came through some route through this social network, and that's all you know.
And again, this is orthogonal to the fact that every little green person here can be an anonymous.
Right.
So we don't assume here that the green things, the identities of the green things are anonymous.
Right, so we don't really care about now, is this an IP or is it a real person? That issue, we're not going to go into details because that's a separate issue that you're under maybe different attacks. Yeah. that's the setting. And at this point, I think I have to be honest and tell you that when we started out this project, Secret was just starting about in 2 months before we started this project. But the landscape of these startups, and especially the anonymous social media, are changing so rapidly that Secret is now shut down due to some management issues, I believe. But still, there are interesting mathematical engineering challenges and solutions that we're going to look at. Okay, so traditionally in maybe network science or machine learning community, such spread of, let's say, rumors on a social network is modeled by diffusion. Okay, so for example, one person might start a message, or it could be an infection. It's an analogy, and there's a clock that ticks on either every node or every edge. And if it's a continuous time, it's going to be an exponential clock. If it's a discrete time, it's going to be a geometric clock. And when it ticks, the message is sent or infection is spread, and it propagates with the new clock, and so on and so forth. And after some time, the infection might spread to some subset of the people, or the messages will spread to a subset of people. And the question is, if an adversary wants to locate the source after some time, can he do that efficiently? And can we protect against such an attack? Right. So there are two types of adversaries that we're going to look at, and in aligned with traditional machine learning literature, the first type of adversary we're going to look at is the snapshot adversary, where after some certain time, the adversary is going to look at the graph, the social network, and also the number, or not the identity, but the people who have the messages at the time, which we call a snapshot. And given this information, the question is, can you try to do network forensics or inference to figure out who the source might have been? So that's the first type of attack. And if I have time, towards the end, I'm going to go to a more realistic setup where now there are a subset of nodes which are spies, which are colluding to share whatever information they could gather to figure out who the source of the message might have been. So for example, there might be these spy nodes, users who either are bribed or who have malwares, and they might know when they got the message and who the message might have come from, and who is themselves, they got the message, and any control packets that are used to coordinate these messages. So given this set of metadata, can you try to figure out the source or not? Question?
How does the spy know that who the message came from? Right?
So we do have a working version implementation of this. On that, for each link, we use onion routing to hide who the message came from. But in this sense, we're giving more information to the adversary just to be more safe. And there are other ways to attack using traffic analysis to attack those type of techniques.
I didn't understand your answer.
Oh, so the question is, right, so let's say I'm using Secret, I see a message, then I don't know who it came from. But in this setting, I'm allowing the information, assuming that the adversary can do perhaps some traffic analysis to figure that out. And this is only being safer because I'm giving more information to the adversary. I could have done the whole thing without allowing the adversary this information, and all the guarantees that I'm going to give still holds. So I'm being more conservative is one thing, and implementation-wise, the way we implement it, which we do have a working implementation, we use onion routing to send a message from one point to another point, given its IP, and so that the receiver doesn't know where the message came from. So that's how we do it in a distributed way, using distributed hash tables and talks, which is an onion routing version of point-to-point communication. But those are subject to some traffic analysis attacks that are unknown. So that's another way why an adversary might have this information, for example.
So you're setting up now a theoretical problem, right?
I'm going to start. Yes, start from the next slide.
Okay, then
I should. Okay.
What is control?
Control, it'll be, it's whatever is used by the protocol. I didn't specify it yet. Later, I'll specify when we get there.
How do you control the radius of a message's delivery? Like, is it flood filled to the entire network? Or
right, so right now, typical assumptions in like rumor spreading is that it eventually spreads to everyone. Just the randomness is how fast, and that's the assumption we're going to stick to. But in practice, there are cases where it doesn't even spread to anyone, and those are, I guess, the assumption that we're making is that it follows the usual assumption that message eventually spreads, or we're only interested in those messages that eventually gets spread, because those messages that doesn't, maybe we don't really care too much.
Is the graph fixed?
Graph is fixed. There's no change in the graph over time.
If it is based on geolocation, then I can move from here to there and find out.
Right, so this is sticking to the social network. Right. Okay, so a lot of questions. Okay, so we're going to start with snapshot-based adversary. Okay, and one thing that's known is that if you're using diffusion, so if you don't intervene with how the messages are spread, you just let it spread as diffusion, then the source is likely to be at the center of the spread. And this can be made precise by Shah and Zaman in 11, where they came up with a rumor centrality which tries to find the likelihood of each of the nodes of being the source and finds the one that's maximum likely. And it is shown that if it's spreading over, let's say, a tree, regular tree with infinite regular tree, then what they can show is that the probability of detecting the source does not decay as the spread, the message spreads to more and more people. Meaning that whether you try to detect it early in the spread or later when millions of people have it, if the assumption is that the underlying graph is a tree, regular, then this, according to diffusion, you can find the source with probability converging to 1/3. So that's not good because more people are getting the messages, but you will still be likely to be found as a source. And what we want to do is that on the similar setting, let's, for starters, assume that the contact network is infinite, regular, and tree. Then we want to come up with a way to intervene with how the messages are spread. We're going to introduce delays on top of the usual spread, appropriately chosen, so that the probability of detection goes down as the message is spread at the rate of 1/nt, where nt is the number of people who have the messages at time t. And that's the best you can hope for because there are n of people who have the messages and they're all equally likely. So that's the theoretical goal.
Okay, sorry, now. So there's an infinite regular tree.
Yes.
And it's a huge assumption, of course, but let's stay there just to understand.
Sure, we'll get to relaxing that later.
So there is an unknown vertex that starts
right.
rumor. The rumor propagates on the graph, the flooding,
right?
Flooding, right?
No, we're going to tell you how to propagate the message.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what we're designing.
I see. So you say
we want to hide the source by designing a message spread, which spreads as fast as diffusion, but is tailored in a way that finding the source is difficult.
What is the other? So just to understand this statement first. So this is the problem.
Perhaps the next slide is the problem setting statement. Right. So there are three assumptions we're making. The first is that the contact network for now is infinite, regular, and tree. I'm going to relax these later. And the adversary has access to the contact network, and on top of that, he has a snapshot at certain time t. We don't know what t he's going to attack, and we're going to protect against all possible t's. And the protocol, what it's allowed is that we're going to use discrete time and allow each node to spread the message to its neighbors, one hop at each time.
So
or add more delays and to slow down.
That you choose one time in this process and the adversary sees the whole graph colored with who has the message and who doesn't, but he does not have timing information.
Exactly.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
And the protocol is allowed to infect any one hop? Okay.
One hops. Yeah, you can, it's discrete time and you can spread one hop per time. Okay. Given this setting, the question is, can you spread the message fast enough while making it ambiguous to figure out where the source is? So that's the mathematical setting. I guess you were waiting for this. All right. So let's start with a line graph as a two example. So in a line graph, you do diffusion, then in discrete time, the message is spread with probability p to each of the uninfected neighbor. So maybe in time one is infected, and then if every time there's a probability p that either infects or not infects. And then after some time, the two sides of the infection is like two independent random walks, and after observing the snapshot of who got the message at time t, anytime t, then another adversary can do the maximum likelihood estimation, and it's always gonna be at the center, which is most likely because of the central limit theorem. It looks like a Gaussian, and the probability of detection in this case on the line, when it spreads according to diffusion, decreases like 1 over square root of n, which is decreasing, but not as fast as we want, because we want it to be 1 over n when n nodes are infected. Okay? So one idea that we're going to use on a line is that instead of keeping the same probabilities of infection, we're going to choose a probability of infection adaptively, appropriately chosen, so that it's difficult to find the source.
So if you go back, so the Zaman Shah result said this should be 1 by 3.
Oh, that's for deregulatories with d bigger than 2.
Oh.
For line which is regulatory with d equals 2, they have the same result. Yeah. And I'll show that later. Yeah. So that's the difference. And that's where we're going to.
It becomes easier to detect if the degree becomes big.
Right. So as it's spreading, it's easier, expanding. And online is somewhat difficult case for
What
that.
do you mean easier to detect? How does it detect?
Easier to detect. The detection is 1 by square root n here, but it's 1 by 3.
1 over 3. For the
detection.
it's probability of detection.
I see.
So when n nodes are infected, well, on a line, if it's diffusion, it's just the central limit theorem, and then the center one is probability mass of 1 over square root of n, and that's what happens. But if it's expanding, like a deregulatory with d bigger than or equal to 2, or 3, then what happens is that it becomes easier, and then no matter how far the message has spread, you can always detect a source with probability 1 over 3, higher than 1 over 3. So that's the Shah and Zaman. Right, so we're gonna go to that, but before, let's look at what happens on a line. So what we prescribe is that you automatically choose a probability. So this is one that works on a line. For example, in the first step, you infect, as usual, with the probability half, you either infect or not, each one of your neighbor. And in the next time step, so at time step 1, some neighbor might have been infected. And at subsequent time steps, let's say t equals 2, then you choose your neighbor with probability chosen by h plus 1 over t plus 1, when h is the hop distance from you to the source, which is 1 in this case, so h plus 1 is 2, and then t is 2, it's 2 over 3. And on the left, you haven't spread anything, so h is 0, that's 1 over 3. So this particular choice of spreading the infection ensures that, and you do it subsequently. So in effectively what we're doing is on each side, instead of doing a random walk, we're doing what's called Polya-Orn process, if you remember what it is. And what we're doing is that we're allowing the spread to go faster in one direction if it has already moved fast, and slower on the other direction if it has already moved slow. Question?
Does the spy know the hop distance?
Sorry?
Does the spy know the hop distance?
Right. So hop distance, spy doesn't know the hop distance. In the protocol, we're gonna allow sending this information about hop distance, and then we're gonna explain how to hide it, and we're gonna tell you, so that's the part of those control packets the spy is gonna look at.
So you're somehow going to design a mechanism of...
Right, which sends all this information distributed way so that this can be implemented in a distributed way. And also, if there are spy nodes, which we're gonna look at later.
Distance?
Sorry?
Without nodes themselves knowing hop distance.
Right. I'll get to that later, but this right now you can think of it as a theoretical implementation of this, and we're gonna talk about real implementation of this.
Does the spy know the parameters or the protocol? That is
Spy knows the protocol and how it's done.
So it knows 3, 4, 1, 4, and all.
Yeah, these knows the distribution, so it can do the maximum likelihood given whatever information that he's given.
So if I got it correct earlier, you said that 0 is like
let's say me, and then one is.
Right, you're the source, and you're one hop neighbor.
So like, how do I control with what probability he shares?
Oh, that's controlled by the protocol. You don't, as a user, you don't know anything. The system, the app chooses all these. Okay. And I'll talk about the implementation. But right now, you can easily think of some centralized app that computes this and makes the spread as it is. And that's how it's done for now.
I think earlier you said that if I get a message and I
Oh yeah. So that part, from that part, we moved on to a theoretical setting where we are assuming that it's a discrete time and everyone is liking the message. If someone doesn't like the message, you can just remove that part of the graph from what we're talking about, and everything works. Right. So, so that's the idea. And then, given now a snapshot, if it was spread according to a prescribed, according to Polyar's arm, then you can do the maximum likelihood and show that the likelihoods are going to be flat. So that the probability of detection, in this case, is order 1/n, and there's a way to make it exactly 1/n, which is a slight variation of the one that I explained. Right. So that's the main idea. By using adaptive protocol, you can make the likelihood or the probability of detection as small as you want, which is a log on 1/n.
I'm sorry to interrupt you because you're not going to be able to. The assumption here is that you know the mechanism.
And the adversary knows the mechanism.
So I mean, that invites the question, I could do better by changing mechanism, and you wouldn't know the mechanism.
Well, you couldn't do better because this is the best you can do.
Yeah, but that assumes that I know how it's being.
No. This assumes.
If I flip a coin and say I'm going to do diffusion or I'm going to do your mechanism, you don't know.
No. Even if when I give you anything or not, this is absolutely the best you can do because n nodes have the message. So your probability of detection is as good as 1/n randomly choosing.
But so your claim is whether I know or not,
right. No matter
how you're spreading the message.
This is the best you can do.
This is the best you can do.
Yeah.
So not knowing, I couldn't do better.
Sure. Yes.
I wouldn't do worse.
Yes. I guess.
So then I don't need to know, according to what you just said. What does spreading?
Right. Because our protocol is tailored in a way that it's optimal. Even though you know the protocol, you cannot really do anything. And they'll be clear when I explain the tree version of it. I think I'll wrap it up when I explain the tree. I'll explain exactly, get back to this point exactly. Okay? All right. So on the deregular tree, what do we do? Use the same idea. So if it was spreading occurred diffusion, on a line, it goes down like 1/√n, and a deregular tree is saturated 1/3. And one idea is that can we use Polya's arm process on each of the path that is spreading, and wouldn't it be good? And it will not be good, and the reason is that because now there are exponentially many paths, there'll be some paths that are really long, and just by looking at the center of this path that's longest, that's going to be detected. So on a line, we get 1/n, which is the optimal. But on a deregular tree, where d is bigger than 2, 3, 4, 5, this is actually worse than diffusion. So we need to combine it in a smart way, and then the idea is the following. So the strategy that we're going to use is that at any given time, we're going to maintain such that the shape of the infected nodes are a perfect ball in this deregular tree, meaning that there'll be a center which we call virtual source of the infection, which is not the actual source of the message, and then every leaf will be at the same distance from the virtual source. We're going to try to maintain that in a distributed way. And at the same time, what we want is that, well, there are many different ways to design how this ball is going to increase. Diffusion will be kind of increasing in all same direction, but we're going to shift the increase and tailor it in a way such that the source is equally likely to be any node that's infected. Okay? Good. So what we prescribe is the following. At t equals 0, we just have the source, and you choose one of the nodes to be the next virtual source. Let's say this one. And then you spread the message at t equals 1, and t equals 2, you spread the message in that direction further, so that now it's a perfect ball of depth 1 depth t over 2 always with a virtual source at some place. And then in the next step, t equals 2, you have two choices. You can keep the virtual source where it is and then spread the neighbors of the infection, or you can move this virtual source in one of these two directions and then move the whole ball of infection towards some direction. So you have these two choices. We prescribe that you use one of these two choices, whether keep it or pass it. And with probability, let's say alpha, which is a function of the degree of the original, the contact network, t, the current time, and h is the hop distance between the virtual source and the source. As a function of those, we're going to choose alpha. Again, all this is known theoretically. Now we're going to explain how to implement this in real life. And given this with probability, this alpha that we're going to specify later, you keep the virtual source where it is and spread it to the leaves one more hop. And or with probability 1 minus alpha, you choose one of the neighbors and pass the virtual source, and then increase the shell, if you will, of the ball in that direction, so that it's this or this, but both of them have the same shape. There's a ball of depth 2.
There is a separation, if I understand, between the system, the infrastructure, and the users, right? So
right, the users only see the messages.
Right. So the problem is, there is, I mean, if the users didn't matter at all, you would just run the diffusion and just decide to post a message in the inbox of every user. But the problem, the reason you have to talk to the users is, you want to say, do you want to share the...
Right, so that's the crucial part. We want to use the social filtering part.
Right.
Otherwise, you could just send it to everyone, and there's no issue.
So just to understand exactly this game now, there is the infrastructure, and the infrastructure has the state of where the parabol ball is.
Yes.
So the infrastructure...
But you don't have to know it in the implementation that we're going to explain, but
so
for theoretically,
they are the virtual source or not. The only thing that the infrastructure needs to add, the little yellow guys, is do you want to continue?
So yeah, how long do you wait before you pass the message? That's the only information that everyone has to know.
Right.
Each node.
That happens in time. So
over time, yeah.
I see. So your separation here is that the infrastructure doesn't pass the actual fact that who is parabol to the
no, in the right now we're assuming that the infrastructure knows all the DTH and alpha and can compute, but the real implementation is not gonna know this exactly. We're gonna send just enough information to be able to pass it according to this random
so the infrastructure
process.
Is distributed in your setup?
Yes.
Oh, even the infrastructure is distributed?
Yes.
So it's not centralized?
No.
There is no user choice in your model.
Right, so again, I was moving to a case where we are assuming, or we are looking at only the people who press like buttons within the...
forming the graph.
One...
No.
But yeah, forming the graph is...
As my friend, that doesn't mean that whatever I post is like.
So, but the graph, there is, for a specific post, there is a graph, but you don't know it. That's the problem of the infrastructure.
Right, but
here, this protocol is not.
Yeah, what you're saying is true.
Yeah.
So for the theoretical reasons, we assume that everyone is pressing the like it button within this given one epoch of time step. So that's kind of assumed. But if it's not the case, you can easily generalize it by deleting those nodes that will never get the message. And then,
for example, in this protocol, your tree will not be balanced anymore.
We're going to look at that too.
So is the total graph a tree or
the total graph is a tree.
Okay, so that...
And what's spread will be also a subtree within the tree. Okay. Good. Okay, so if you pass the message, pass the virtual source, then the virtual source chooses one of its neighbors and passes it and infects its neighbors, and it spends next time step to infect these 4 nodes so that it's a perfect balanced ball. And then if you try to keep it, then you just spend next time step to infect one of neighbors, and then stays the same for the one time step. Okay. Question?
So in this, once you fix the virtual source, it's a simple diffusion process? Like how does it...
No, virtual source is changing.
Yeah, so So at any time instant, you either choose to keep the virtual source
Or to move it to another
yeah.
node.
So once you have done that step, how do you?
And then you just infect the neighbors that are prescribed so that the new virtual source will be the center of the new.
Probability of infecting the neighbors. There is a.
Oh, that's deterministic.
Is there simple?
Yeah, the only randomness is in where to move the virtual source, and except for that, everything is deterministic.
Oh, so then you infect all the neighbors.
Yes.
Positively.
Yes.
But if I basically just give me 2 snapshots, 2 times, then I can draw a direction vector of the 2 centers and go back.
There are many directions. So, in fact, whatever we say is true, even if you allow snapshots after some time t, let's say after 10, you allow snapshot after 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, the guarantee doesn't change too much. From 1 over n, it goes to log n over n, which is not too much if you think about it. Yeah. Right. And so adversary sees the snapshot, and he can easily find the virtual source. It's the center of the whatever he saw. And the question is, can he locate the author? And we prescribe using the alpha that depends on the degree and the current time and the hop distance between source and the virtual source. And if you use this, then what's going to happen is that every node in the snapshot, except for the virtual source, so it's 1 over n minus 1, are equally likely to be, exactly have equal likelihood of being the source. So this is chosen to match the goal. And what's nice is that it's true for any t. At any t you attack, the same guarantee holds. And it's also, again, true if you allow subsequent snapshots, because the information you get after the first snapshot is very minimal. And it spreads as fast as diffusion with probability half, for example. And it's almost perfect hiding 1 over n minus 1 instead of 1 over n.
Is that process on the one-dimensional line becoming the previous process? So
no, but this can be on one dimensional line.
Right, sure.
And it looks similar, but that's the one achieves the same guarantee on a line. There's a version of this on a line.
But it's not Polya.
It's not Polya. Polya is just easier to explain to you. And going back to your question is, now what is the adversary going to do with this information of how the thing is spread? Nothing, because even if he uses to do ML, it's just everything except for the line. So he just chooses any node, not the virtual source, but any node, and that's the best he can do. So he doesn't use it basically, although he has it. Or because he has it, he knows that he doesn't have to use it. Yeah.
Maybe just so I understand, so if the virtual source moves, nodes need to know their distance to the new virtual source, right?
Right, so currently assume that everyone knows here this information, but actual implementation that we're going to go to doesn't have to know that. It just has to know how long it's going to wait before he sends the packet and the control packets. And I'll explain. And the idea of that is that, well, right, so no, not even that complicated. What's going to happen in real implementation is that, well, the whole thing is one instance of this random process, and what the source, who can be definitely trusted, is going to do is that if I'm the author, I'm the source, then I'm going to simulate this whole process for 1,000 time steps, for example. And then that tells me, given the contact network, how each node should be, how long it's going to be waiting, and how long its subsequent nodes, descendants, have to wait. So all this, you'll make it into a packet, which we know how to, and then which will be the control packet of information, a vector, and you send it to your neighbor with it. And he, out of this, he just extracts how long he has to wait, and then he removes that part and gives it to his descendants, and so on and so forth. So everything is simulated in advance at the source.
But if my node is a spy, okay, the question...
Right, when we talk about the spy, we're gonna assume that the spy knows the whole, sees the whole this packet, and tries to do the attack. That's what we're gonna look at. Probably not gonna have time to go that far. I'll try. So this is the talk that has most number of questions in my life, but that's good. So, and it's being recorded, so I'm not saying the thing, but it's good because you're interested. So thank you for the questions, and let me try to speed up a little bit. So now the infection, you can easily figure out the size because it's just a ball on a tree, and then detection is 1 minus NT minus 1 minus being the virtual source, so it's essentially optimal. There's no way anyone can beat 1 over n. And then also the distance between the actual one and the estimated one, the average distance or expected distance is linear in t, which is increasing with t. As in diffusion, it was something like 3 or something, a constant. So this is nice. This has all the nice features that we want. And now let's see. There are 3 main assumptions that we made. How much time do I have?
About 15 minutes.
Oh, okay. It's okay, good. So there are 3 assumptions we made. It's infinite about the contact network. It was 3. It was regular, and it's infinite. The infinite part is somewhat just to avoid the degenerate cases where you are the source and you have only like 2 friends or 1 friend, and then it gets weird. So it's not a big deal. And also, tree assumption is in some sense worse for us because the cycles make it more ambiguous to figure out who the source is. So in some sense, revealing the tree is the worst case, so we believe it's okay. But the one assumption that we really want to relax is that it's regular that we assumed. So what happens for irregular? So we're going to stick to trees, infinite trees, they're irregular, and to put it into perspective, we're going to use random irregular trees, meaning that the social graph will be generated according to some degree distribution. Each node will have some degree in their tree. And given this sample of a branching process of a random tree, how does our algorithm do in terms of probability of detection? Is it still doing 1 over n, or does it get worse? Is the question. So you can think of it as a branching process where you are just a node trying to spread according to our protocol, but we're going to choose alpha such that you are always passing the virtual source. This makes things a little bit easier to understand. Okay? Although the analysis can be generalized to the actual algorithm we prescribe, we're going to assume that it is adaptive diffusion which passes the virtual source all the time. Then the process is going to be that you pass the virtual source, so in fact 1 node, and then you're going to draw the degree of this node from the distribution. For example, 3 with probability half and 5 with probability half, for example. So it's going to have some neighbors which will be infected at time equals 2. And then you're passing the virtual source. You choose one of these neighbors and pass the virtual source and draw a degree from the distribution. Infect its neighbors at t equals 3, and infect the neighbors of its neighbors at t equals 4, again drawing the degrees from the degree distribution. So this is branching according to branching process. I guess this is an example of a Galton-Watson process in some sense. And given this, the question is, well, now the likelihoods are not exactly the same for all the nodes. So can we come up with a maximum likelihood estimator for the source given an adversary who sees this graph now, which is irregular? And how good is the performance of this? This is a valid, excuse me, mathematical question. So the maximum likelihood estimator for the adversary, now knowing the protocol and using the information, is the following. You know the source is at the leaf because we were passing the virtual source all the time. So the true source is always on the leaf. So you're going to look at all the leaves, and along the path from the leaf to the virtual source, you're going to multiply the degrees -1 on that path. And the one that has minimum multiplication of the degrees, or maximum 1 over the multiplication of the degrees. And I put the degree of the virtual source here, although the argmax doesn't change whether I have it or not, because it's same for all the nodes, but I put it there for some reason that we're going to see. And that's the maximum likelihood, meaning that the one where the virtual source traveling had small number of options to digress is more likely. Okay? If we had more options, then it could have gone the other way. So in this case, these nodes share the same value. They're all maximum likelihood estimators, with this value being 1 over 10. 5 is the degree of this guy, and degree is 3. 3 minus 1 is 2, so it's like this. So these are all, so the adversary would choose one of them uniformly at random, for example. That's the maximum likelihood. The question is, now we have an adversary and we have a model. Can we simulate and see how well our algorithm does? What's the probability of detection as the number of infected nodes increases for different degree distributions? One maybe 3 and 5 with probability half and half, one with maybe 3 and 10 with probability half and half. This is growing much faster because the degrees are larger. The question is, then does the probability of detection smaller? And the thing is that this is 1 over n that we're shooting for. And if you look at attacking at time 1, 2, let's say 3 or 4, then probability of detection is the same no matter how fast the graph is expanding. Okay? So you know there's something going on, and there should be some way to explain this. And there was a question.
Yeah, can you just go back?
Okay.
So you have the problem that you knew that one of the leaves is going to be the source.
Yeah.
If you,
because we chose to pass the virtual source every time.
If you make to choose that, like the purple dot can go back where it came from, won't this be eliminated? I mean, so the
there are ways to improve opponent. I'm giving you, well, in the original version, there's no way you can improve opponent because it was achieving 1 over n, so you don't have to consider your proposed algorithm. In this case, this is mainly to analyze our algorithm as is with alpha chosen, because it's not clear what alpha you should be choosing because there's a parameter d in this alpha that now it's not clear, it's not irregular. So we're trying to analyze a version of our algorithm at this point.
But you want to keep the rate of spread also fast enough, right?
Right. Well, the rate of spread is, right now it's kept at the ball of size t over 2, and that's what we are shooting for right now. And we wanted to explain this. So we want to analyze the probability of detection of the process that we explained. And this is the function of snapshot. GT is the snapshot. That the V that maximizes this was the maximum likelihood. And just to explain the maximum likelihood estimator, we'll choose the V that maximizes this quantity. So this is a quantity that only depends on the tree or snapshot. And probability of detection, if you think about it, is the probability that we run this process for time t, and after time t, we do v hat of ml as a function of gt, and the probability that's equal to the v star that you started out with. And it is equal to summation over all the possible different snapshots that you can see, and probability that you see such a snapshot, and then the conditional probability that you detect. And this conditional probability that you detect given the snapshot ends up being exactly this thing that you're maximizing if you're doing the attack, which makes sense. It's a sanity check. If you're doing the attack, you want to maximize this thing, so you're choosing the V that maximizes this quantity, and that appears here as the probability of detection. Okay? And we want to analyze it at this point, which is nothing but expectation of this quantity that depends on the graph. So now we're going to think of completely move away from the context and say that this is a Galton-Watson process according to some degree distribution that propagates for t depth. And at t, we're going to look at a particular quantity defined by this, which is the maximum extremal quantity, looking at all the path from the center to a leaf, and then 1 over, so minimizing the product of the degrees. So what's the minimum product of the degrees in a Galton-Watson process is the question we're asking, and the expectation of it. Okay? And that's going to tell us what the probability of detection looks like. This, we couldn't find anyone who's done this before, so we had to start from scratch. And the thing is that we can actually compute this quantity, expectation of this quantity, exactly, but it's a numerical result, meaning that we give you convex optimization, which only depends on the degree distribution of the nodes. And if you solve this convex optimization, numerically it's gonna give you this value. Okay, how this change as a function of t. Okay. And the corollary of our result, which is perhaps easier to understand, is the following. So we had this experiment and we wanted to explain it. And the corollary says that, well, the degree distribution, let's say, has many degrees with many probabilities, but let's call the minimum degree d mean and the associated probability p mean. And if d mean minus 1 times p mean is greater than or equal to 1, which means non-extinction in Galton-Watson process, which I'll go into, then what happens, which is, by the way, coincidentally, the examples that we were running, d mean is 3, d mean minus 1 is 2, probability was half, so if you multiply, you get 1, so it satisfies the condition of this corollary. Our theorem is more general, but this is much more easy to explain. Then probability of detection, which is the expectation of this extremal product of degrees, is going to be d mean minus 1 to the power minus t as t increases, plus some smaller order terms. Okay, which means, among other things, it means that it doesn't depend on other degrees. Whatever comes here, doesn't matter, which is what we see. If you change the degree, the probability of detection doesn't change. So this exactly explains what we see. And the proof of the general result is more involved, so I'm just trying to give you a proof idea for the corollary only. And the idea is the following. What we're interested in is you have a Galton-Watson process like this, and what I'm asking is look at all the leaves and tell me the product of degrees along the path from the root to the leaf that's minimum among all the leaves that you have at time t. And how we're going to do it, in this case, when d mean minus 1 times w mean, p mean is bigger than or equal to 1, is the following. So we're going to create, this is the original Galton-Watson process that we're looking at, branching process. And what we're going to look at is another version where you kill everything that's not d mean. For example, if a node has degree that's not d mean, you kill it and all the descendants of that node. And the question is now, does this changed process survive? And it does. If d mean minus 1 times p mean is bigger than or equal to 1, then this survives with positive probability. Meaning that whenever you have a Galton-Watson process with high probability, there'll be at least a node whose in their path has only d means. That's how we prove this corollary, and we can generalize this idea in the case when this times this is less than 1, then you have to be more clever with how you choose which ones to kill, but we can do that, and that ends up being a solution of a convex optimization. That's very nice. Okay, so another assumption that we had is that there are a lot of control packets like the distance and then the current time and all this flying around. So how can we avoid it? And this is best addressed in the context of a spy model where there are spy nodes collecting all this information on top of the timing of when they got the data, and on top of it maybe who they got it from. We're giving more information and all the control packets. And can we still, or how well does our algorithm do against such attacks? So again, we're going to start with a line. So in a line, you can think of just two spies, spy 1 and spy 2, which are separated by n nodes, let's say. And somewhere in between, you start the message. And the question is that, well, spy 1 is going to collect when he got the message, who he got it from, which is trivial in a line, and 2 is himself, it's trivial, and any state information that's used in, for example, in the Polya's process, which should be the hop distance and then the relative time from the onset of the message. So if you have this, then you're killed because you know you're 2 hops away from this one and 3 hops away from this one, so there's only 1 node. So you're completely detected. So you don't want to send all the state information. Instead, you want to be clever. So what we prescribe is that Okay, prescribe is that, well, before we go on, let's say if there's some way to hide the control packet, then spies are okay. So if you use diffusion, then again you get killed like a central limit theorem. But if you use our algorithm but hide the state information somehow, then it's again flat. It's order 1 over n that you get detected. And the question is now, how can you hide this state information in a nice way? And what we prescribe is the following. So when at the onset of the message, the source, which can be trusted, is going to simulate the whole process by himself, which will tell, for example, on each side on the line, how long to wait for each of these nodes, and that's it. Wait 1 time and then spend, wait 2 time slot and then spend, and so on and so forth. So you'll make it into a vector, send it with the message, and the one that gets this will wait for the time that is prescribed to, erase all the history, and only send the future. So every node, or the spy node, will know what happens after he gets the message, but not previously. This is completely doable in a distributed way. So in essence, he knows, the spies know when he got the message and all the sample path after he has seen the message, and how much information is lost. In this case, so in order to analyze this, we need to analyze how much information one can extract from sample path of, for example, if you're using Polya's own process, it'll be Polya's own. If you're using our process, it'll be our process. And we can do it for the case when you have, for example, D-regular trees, and you spread it according to how we prescribe in the adaptive diffusion, then the spies will be seeing, so we assume each node is a spy with probability P. And each spy will be collecting the time and the state of all the information about the sample path of the descendants from himself. And given all this information, we can again do the maximum likelihood and analyze our algorithm and give an analytical formula for what the expected probability of detection is going to be. So this is, but the formula itself is somewhat messy, so I'm giving you a plot. So this is when the underlying graph has degree 5, comparing diffusion, probability of detection, when this is the number of spies. 1 is all the nodes are spy except for the source, and 0 is there's no spy. And this thick blue line will be on the same graph, what happens if you use our adaptive diffusion. And what's nice is that as the degree of the underlying graph increases, the performance of adaptive diffusion gets better and better, and then the diffusion gets worse and worse for the reasons that it's more expanding. And this line, which is the 45-degree line, is absolutely the best you can do, because there's always an estimator which can achieve probability of detection of P. Question?
This mechanism assumes that the source node knows the entire graph.
Right. So, well, this is theoretical still. It's a deregular tree, so he might as well know the deregular tree. He just needs to know D. But in truth, like in real life, how we're going to implement it, the mechanism is distributed, so it doesn't have to really use the information about each of the whole graph, but only the choice of the D he's making. That's all he needs to know. And then everything else will be distributed. Okay, so with that, I think I should conclude, and these are my wonderful collaborators, and then thank you for all the questions.
We had quite a few questions. Maybe a couple more, and
there are more? Okay. Please.
So you mentioned that cycles may make it harder to detect these sources, right? What may also happen is cycle may make your algorithm restrict in a particular cluster, which may make it easier to detect, right?
Yeah, it's not immediately clear what happens if you have cycles. So that should be tested numerically. We have numerical tests with Facebook graphs that are positive, that are promising in the paper. Other than that, theoretically, I wouldn't know what to say in the cycles. But our algorithm, we analyze it on a tree, but the idea itself doesn't have to be a tree, meaning that it works for any symmetric graph. For example, in our upcoming paper, we have this similar prescription of algorithm if it's a grid. Any dimensional grid, you can come up with an algorithm which spreads fast and achieves 1/n obfuscate perfect hiding. So any symmetry will work. Tree is not, or the cyclelessness is not crucial for our algorithm. It's crucial for analyzing it. It makes it easier.